folks, we're getting close to the end of season 14 here on Mentioned in Dispatches. This is episode 9. And we actually have official visitors tonight, and I can say that because they did have to get permission to be here and clear it through official channels, which means that we also have to lead in with the disclaimer that anything said by our guests tonight are solely their opinions and do not represent the opinions or positions of any agency or organization, past, present, or future, that they may happen to represent at some other facet of their life. But back in an official capacity this time, our buddy James Sterrett. Mr. James Sterrett, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you.
I got to remember to lead in with Dr. James Sterrett. I don't know.
Well, we could always redo it, right?
Well, I know we could redo it, but it's better to just listen to me fess up to being a schmuck and forgetting to throw that in there. So, but yes, welcome back in your official capacity. Every time I try to do this, I get the job title wrong. The official job title is Deputy Director of...
I'm the chief of the simulations division in the Directorate of Simulation Education at the United States Army University.
All right. I told you I would mess it up if I tried to do it. So how do you fit all that on a business card?
I leave bits of it out.
4-point type. All right.
Yeah.
So, but most importantly, as it applies to tonight's discussion, you are also kind of the academic lead on the Master of Military Art and Science program for the wargaming curriculum there.
That's correct. So the Master of Military Arts and Science program is much bigger than me, but in it, I have a focus track for wargame design. So the students in that program routinely tell me that it is the hardest and the best way to get your master's degree at CGSC, because everybody else has to research and then write a paper. They have to research, design a game, test the game, try to get it to some level of polish, and then they have to write a paper defending it. So they have to write a thesis just like everybody else, but also they have to design and test the game. So that's part of the reason it's the hardest. There's a lot more work, but equally it's the best, because when you've spent the past 8 months writing your thesis and you walk up to people and say, hey, would you like to read my thesis? Most people sort of back away slowly saying, no, no, no. Whereas if you walk up to people and say, hey, you want to look at this game I designed? They're like, yeah, sure, that sounds cool. Let's take a look. So it's much easier to get people interested in your project, one. And two, I found that students are often much less burned out on their project as the end draws near than they are on just grinding out a paper on a topic that, in all fairness, they were super enthused about at the beginning of the year. And now it's often something of a millstone that they're just trying to get through.
Grad school has a way of beating the enthusiasm for your topic out of you.
Yeah, when I was doing my dissertation, there was a standard not quite joke that you would finish your dissertation when you hated your topic.
Yeah. Our other guest this evening is one of the good doctor's annual victims, students, staff ranger school participants. Alex, introduce yourself. Where are you in the career and the CGSC curriculum? And welcome to the podcast.
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is MAJ Alex Adkins. Currently a student at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I am currently a simulations officer, about 10, 12 years into my active duty career. In the former life, I was an infantry officer before that. And so coming into the immediate leadership education, ILE for majors, coming into the Command and General Staff College, I had wanted to do this program because I felt it would develop me as a simulations officer. And then I could explore a topic that I felt that I had a potential solution for.
Infantry guy, man. Sorry, you're talking to an ex-tanker here. So I can appreciate the level of pain in which infantry folks inflict on themselves while keeping myself nice and toasty inside the tank. It was always a little more comfortable there.
Absolutely.
Out of curiosity, when you showed up at CGSC, are you one of us weirdos that already knew what wargaming was going into it, other than what you're dumped onto with the military decision-making process, or were you one of the converts to the cause once you were there and found out what some of the electives were?
So I was fortunate in coming into it, understanding what wargaming was. I was able to take an introduction to wargaming course offered by the Command and General Staff College before it changed over to being handled by the Army Modeling and Simulations Office, where it now resides. So I was able to do that with under the tutelage of Dr. Sterrett before I came to the college. So I had a general sense of what wargaming was, and then got advanced knowledge of this program.
All right. So
I'll
you
also toss in a note here that in theory, there is competition to get into the program. Depends on the gear, depends on how many people are showing up. But I have a long history of giving a preferential placement to students who contact me early, either before they've arrived or before the official presentation sign-up time arrives, who have discussed the topic with me and said, hey, I really want to do that. My attitude is, if you've got enough get up and go to do that, I'm going to give you a slot in this program. And Alex is one of those.
Well, excellent. So, James, in terms of the program as a whole, I know we've talked some about big picture stuff with the program. I'm curious if you've got a couple of details you can share in this regard. This is grad school, right? I mean, you end up with a master's degree from an accredited university, and so when you come out the other end, there's an expectation, there's a certain amount of academic rigor that's been and the academic ringer you've been put through. What does the course sequence look like specifically for the wargaming classes? Not worried about all the other sort of, air quote general, like it's a master's degree that's not really general education, but there's other course requirements for the MMAS that go beyond just the wargaming program. But for the wargaming program specifically, what does that course sequence look like?
In the fall, they've got to take 2 courses, one of which is the standard research methods course that everybody has to take. And they also take a wargame design course from me, which is intended to take people from, if you will, 0 to 45. That my assumption is you can walk into this master's program with no knowledge of wargaming other than a desire to do the thing. And if you apply yourself, you can come out the other end having done a respectable job. So that means that I've got to take people in and rapidly, all of this happens really in August, introduce them to what a war game is. We begin by playing Battle for Moscow, the Victory Point Games version of the old Frank Chadwick design. We have a series of classes pretty fast that are intended to introduce people to what are the parts of war games and what are some of the sample systems in them. So I often call this the petting zoo classes because they're organized around time and space and assets and resolution. So time is really command and control, is really the sequence of play. How are those different? So I'm showing them a series of games and how those model sequence of play and why they model sequence of play that way and why they might choose to build a game that used that system. And then we go to space, which really is mapping or otherwise spatially representing things. And why would you choose to use these various approaches in your game, be it hexes versus point-to-point versus area, be it tracks versus piles of cubes or whatever. Assets is anything that the player can control. So a lot of that is, hey, here's our ways of representing units, but it's also why would you use this way of representing a unit as opposed to that way of representing a unit? And last but not least is resolution. When the player decides to do something, how do you decide what happens next? What's the outcome? Most of which is focused on a intro to combat modeling. And from there, they've got the luxury, the whole course has got the luxury of, we have sort of weekly sessions, typically their schedule doesn't allow it every week, of what I like to call critical play or directed play. So given the student projects, I'm figuring out what games they need to play because either they are mechanically or topically related to the project they're going to do, so that it's a deeper dive into something that might give them systems that they can pull from. We finished that off in around Thanksgiving. They have a hard deadline of deliverable of their first playable prototype at Thanksgiving. I tell them repeatedly that it's okay if this crashes and burns. They have to walk in with something that I believe that they believe was going to be a playable product. And then if we discover that no, it's not, then cool. We can adjust fire from the impact point and start refining it into something that's actually workable. We found out from bitter experience the first time we ran this that if we let somebody keep on saying, oh, it's not ready, oh, it's not ready, oh, it's not ready, we never uncovered all the flaws and said, okay, let's fix these and made it actually be better. So then we transitioned into the winter, and in the winter, they're in a course with me. Everybody else in that course is doing things like mock defenses or presentations of their thesis. For us, it is really an alternate form of mock defense. We're doing playtesting and refining, typically about one playtest every week or 2 weeks, depending on the number of students. And frankly, a playtest is often a form of a mock shock defense, because anything that happens in the game, the playtesters may turn to Alex or Josh Earhart, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, who's the other student this year in this, and say, hey, why does the game work this way? Why did you do this? Hey, it might be better if you did this. And then we're discussing that and trying to make the game function better. I always tell them that the way to win an argument with me over the design of their game is to drive it back to the purpose of the game. Because if the thing they're doing matches the purpose better, then clearly that's the way to do it. It's got to answer the need that they're trying to build it for. They should be done playtesting ideally by about now, by early March. Doesn't always happen that they're done playtesting, not least because people can't bear to put it down and stop, which is a good thing, so that they can get it written and have the thesis written and have a rough draft done by the end of April for a complete rough draft, which means that we on the committee can be hacking away at that complete rough draft and defending sometime around early May. It's compared to a normal grad school where you've got a year of coursework and then a year to do the thesis. This is accelerated work.
You don't say.
Yeah.
It is very much the crash course. Obviously, there's a whole lot around understanding the game design piece of things, but how much of the actual topic research do you find in the war games compared to the folks that are just writing a paper and not having to also design a game on top of having to learn more about the topic itself?
Honestly, it's not as different as you might think. I've been involved over the years in probably half a dozen MMASs that were not in the war game design track. And some of them involved titanic amounts of research. There was a guy last year who did a historical research MMAS on the Germans fighting around Dubno Brody Lutsk in the summer of 41 and June of 41, which I have know a lot about because that was a chunk of my master's degree 30 years ago. And he was going off and doing archival research in order to make this possible. Huge amounts of time spent on it, an amazing effort. But equally, there are others where they run a survey and they do math on it. And there's not as much grunt research effort that goes into those. And you may then turn around and say, well, James, you're a historian and you're sort of sitting here and looking askance at the guys who do social science stuff. And okay, hey, my biases are flying free. But and it is fair to say, very fair to say, that even the ones that I've been on where somebody did the survey and wrote up the survey, I could see how much the students had learned in the year about doing a research project. So from that sense, even though I was sort of, there's not much of a result here to my eye, the flip side of it was, in terms of student learning, there was a lot going on. So I was happy about it from that perspective.
With all of that, we're going to flip back over to Alex. And so, Alex, before we dive too much into your specific topic that you're busy working on, talk to us a little bit about your experience in that class sequence that James just described in terms of sort of starting out with the petting zoo and then moving on from there about learning the different facets of modeling and the various aspects of that. And then starting to, with the research on your topic, starting to kind of shape your model towards your topic and vice versa.
Should I go away and hide in case he says something mean?
No. You're going to sit here and take it like you're supposed to.
Oh, no.
Come on, man. I sit here for like an hour every week and listen to you guys pick on me. So.
All right. Over to Alex.
No picking on this for right now. So the way that as we came into the course, Dr. Sterrett has done a really good job in setting out initial resources in terms of like the assigned readings that we come to each of our classes, and that it's really to prepare us for a more fundamental understanding about wargame design and some of the background logic. And so that was really helpful because we could reference those items as we were pulling together a thesis. And then try to bring all the things together that we were seeing. And so as we were coming into each of these kind of curated experiences for the petting zoos, we were able to kind of key in on the aspects of whatever the topic was for the day from each of the games that we were looking at and say, oh, well, I like, as Dr. Sterrett said, like the turn sequencing of this game and exactly how it's modeled. And kind of blend that with what, we're kind of mentally picturing this thing going through with. And so as we're kind of merging all of those different topics with our initial thought, sometimes the feasibility of what we thought was going to be an amazing concept, it's going to be super easy to make, some of that starts to peel away. But then as you start to do your research to try to justify your models on your own, and that's where you kind of get your eyes open to some of the intricacies of some of the supporting data that's necessary to have a war game, and have it be realistic, especially for a topic like mine. It's got to have a certain level of realism that's grounded in doctrine lots of times in my case, but to be able to present that level of credibility whenever the time comes. And then the real test comes in once you actually put the digital ink to the paper, so to speak, and actually produce that prototype. Because, the grand idea I had in my head when I actually put it into a product that had to be conveyed to someone else, that was far more challenging than I anticipated, and to be able to convey that. And so a lot of the aspects of not the core aspects, but some of the supporting aspects of my original concept really kind of fell away by the time we get to that initial prototype in November. And I will say mine crashed and burned on that first run. It was not great, but was able to learn a lot from that and start to get that iterative progression going. And so I started to make the revisions and then really hammer away on the thesis through the rest of that fall. And then we came back around into the January timeframe and really hit hard those weekly play tests, and to be able to iterate again, play it, update the products. And it's pretty remarkable, I think, from even my own perspective, looking back at the products that I produced initially versus where they've gotten to now over about an 8-week period. It's a pretty dramatic change of what you can do in a given, even in a single week. It is a massive amount of work, but those iterations are critical to getting the feedback that you need, and then making a new model, testing it with your subject matter experts, hopefully, who are playing the game, and then finally getting to an actual, not a finished product, but as finished as it's going to get for the time that we have. And then I'm at the point now where I'm at the tail end of that play testing piece and trying to jump into the codifying it all hastily into the rest of the thesis.
All righty. As you were going through that class sequence that James was describing, was there a particular part of it that you really had to sort of knuckle down and kind of reconceptualize what you thought about how wargame design worked? Was there a particular part of it that was a little more challenging than the other parts of it? Because you came in with a little bit of wargaming knowledge ahead of time, but was there a particular part of it in there that really kind of baked your noodle for a little bit?
I think so. And I think like the aspects that I was saying were kind of falling off as I was making that initial prototype. I think that's where I really started to feel that, because I had a sense of how I would approach my own game. But whenever I had to make models that would objectively quantify something and then make sense to someone else, I realized that the way I had approached it fundamentally, like my mental approach for it, wouldn't work in that war game design.
All right. And flipping it back around, was there some part of that academic program where you're like, oh, I got this. This is no problem. And you kind of breezed through a little bit of it and were able to knock off for a beer a little early rather than have to focus on the homework quite as hard.
Yes. And pretty early on, I got away from producing a lot of pieces, and then all of the associated, player aids or updating of little tiny counters and things like that. And so it's a pretty low product war game. And so in some regards, when I make an update, it's not necessarily I have to update hundreds of little counters and pieces for that aspect. So sometimes I get to kick back on that piece. I rely on the players to draw on the pieces.
Go!
Alex, you should explain why you don't have to make pieces.
Sure. So the main going in assumption for my war game. Well, would you like me to go into the topic now, and then I can?
Well, yeah, James is sort of getting ahead of us a little bit. I was going to get to the whole. All right, so tell us, what is your game about, and what is it you're doing with it?
All right. So what I've developed is a game called Overmatch. And it creates a manual war game for a brigade level staff to conduct course of action analysis during the military decision-making process, which is the Army's planning process when we go through operations and training. And so what what Doctrine provides is a general framework for wargaming, not necessarily in the sense that we understand in this kind of group, but broadly speaking, it is very loose, more of the war space game kind of definition. But the Doctrine doesn't really give you a lot of systems to rely on. And so it kind of leaves staff officers in the lurch in the moment to create something on their own. And what we've seen from trends from our combat training center rotations is that we don't always get that right. And so there's a lot of feedback out there from those centers in particular is that the Army needs some sort of system to help enable that war game process to make our plans better and more actionable. And so my project aims to do that, is to be able to provide a custom war game system for a brigade staff that they can use when they're tired and exhausted with a brand new staff and trying to get through the motions, but also produce the level of analysis and refinement that's necessary to facilitate the planning process. And so to get after the initial question that Dr. Sterrett had kind of teed up, so I wanted to make sure that the overhead to kind of buy into the game cognitively was as low as humanly possible. Just to reduce the barriers of, well, I don't know what this thing is. I'm not going to learn a new game. I don't want to have to set up a bunch of pieces. And so my approach with that was to try to play the game off of as many of the planning products that should be coming into this step of planning as possible. Reduce the amount of pieces or transcription or preparation that it took to get into the game. And then on the backside, once we're done with the game, getting it back out of the game kind of system and then into planning mode as easily as possible. And so the way I kind of approached that was to be able to have the players put a clear sheet of acetate over a topographic map, a 1 over 50,000 map, and have the players use alcohol markers and draw operations graphics that were that are factored into the war game design, so that those in effect become the pieces, and you're redrawing a unit icon as it moves across. And that way you don't have a big bag of wooden blocks that you're trying to carry around, potentially, like in a desert, like the National Training Center out in Fort Irwin. And it's something that someone bumps the table or a big breeze comes over, you're not getting pieces knocked around. So that was kind of the fundamental approach there.
That's what Post-it notes are for.
Yeah, until sand gets on them.
Post-its
This way, we wind up in a situation where the bottle of alcohol that I've had and been slowly working through for years on this kind of project, we ran through it, and there's some mild consternation in the supply system when I said, I need more rubbing alcohol.
Probably things you never thought you were going to have to say, but
they certainly didn't expect it, and there was particular consternation over the part about it being rubbing alcohol. Non-drinking alcohol didn't always get translated through the request correctly.
Yeah, I need a bottle of alcohol, usually around a bunch of field grades is not referring to a cleaning agent.
Yep.
Yeah. So James, I got to ask, you did wave Neil Garra's book on Wargaming: A Systematic Approach in front of him, right?
I did not, in part because our copy got loaned and we haven't managed to get it back. And Mike Dunn has been trying to contact Neil Garra to find out how we could manage to get back into print.
So is this the part where I get to tease you about I got a copy?
Yes, you do.
All right. I get to tease him. Woohoo! Yeah. I have a copy here somewhere. For some folks, so we're going way back into the archives here. Some folks may remember the very first Origins that Bayonet Games appeared at when we first debuted the original Warfighter system was 2005 at Origins, and we split a booth with Neil Garra. And so we had our original Movement to Contact game, some of the old RPG stuff, and Neil Garra was in the other half of the booth with his soldier chess book, he had a couple copies of the Wargaming: A Systematic Approach. Wasn't really expecting to move a bunch given the Origins crowd there, but he also had a whole bunch of pre-printed custom chess boards. They were 11 by 17 cardstock, but they were custom chessboards with a bunch of the soldier chess rules and alternate terrain on those chessboards. And we sold a bunch of all of that. I'm not sure we made our money back on the booth cost, but that's okay because we were having fun. But we did in fact have Wargaming, a systematic approach from s2company.com for sale at Origins one year. Alex, the process you're describing was not a pen and ink solution, but a retired Army Intel lieutenant colonel, former infantry guy. He was branch detailed over to infantry, did in fact develop a similar system to what you're describing, but he didn't do it with, drawing on the map. You did actually have to have some pieces as a part of it all. He worked up a system where you didn't have to, but one option was to use, get a whole bunch of giant rubber erasers from the Dollar Tree and kind of cut those up, because then you had little rubber things you could put push pins into to show unit strength and composition based on the colors of the push pins. And those were things that you always had laying around a talk at the time. You always had erasers and push pins laying around. It was one of those things that was very fiddly, though. The process and rules by which Colonel Garra explained sort of how to do some of the wargaming was very fiddly. But the one thing I remember from it, and the thing that I'm going to pose to you about your particular game, the one thing that I definitely took out of that and took back to some of my time toward the the later part of my staff days at a brigade headquarters, when wargaming things in the MDMP, something that is rarely discussed or analyzed in much detail, and in hobby wargames is sort of dealt with for you by the structure of the game, is the time that it takes for certain operations to take place. When you're going through an MDMP wargame and you're doing that course of action analysis, it's for the hobby audience that doesn't know. It's not just about do you win the game, because just because you can complete the mission doesn't necessarily mean that a different course of action wouldn't be better if it supports the commander's intent a little better, whether it's sustainability or survivability or whatever other criteria the boss has given you as a part of that war game. But the thing that rarely gets discussed going through those MDMP war games is how long things take during each of those steps along the way. And the time structure in an MDMP war game is never as rigid as it is in a hobby game, where a turn is 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 12 hours, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. So Alex, that's a long lead into, I would throw to you. How do you deal with the time aspect as a part of all of this in your turn sequence, your turn structure in your game?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because like you said, going into it, this is the way that the game is played is not the same as a hobby game. It's not for fun. It's to get a result. Even if you lose, it's okay, because as long as you learn something from it and you meet your criteria, right? And facilitate your planning. But the time. So the way I started this was to try to look at everything in a base the base time block of an hour. And so all of my research to grab from doctrinal planning factors for name your military specialty, engineering, supply and sustainment, artillery, things like that. I pegged it to 1 hour. And fortunately, most doctrinal rates and consumption activities will give you some degree of that. And so I use that as the base unit for my war game. And so understanding what any given unit can do or consume in a given hour allows you to then expand that back out and give a certain degree of flexibility. And part of that is where I'm kind of sitting right now. And like Dr. Sterrett should probably cover his ears, because I did another play test this morning, so I've got to make some more revisions. But it's good. It's all good. But it's mostly focused on that. So it's not just. Yeah. I'll have to look for that. It's not just a hour by hour sequence, because that's not time efficient, right? For the amount of time that a brigade staff realistically has to conduct wargaming, or some aspects of it may be pretty boring. It's like I need to drive for 8 hours through the desert before I get to something exciting. The war game's got to have some degree of flexibility for the staff to say, all right, skip that part. Let's get to the fun part. Right. And so, what I've kind of structured as a choose your own adventure kind of, like a la carte menu for, the game itself, to be able to use the turn structure, which uses, which drives like players through what we call the operational framework. So it's a way of kind of bounding a unit's area in space and kind of grouping gross activities for the units within those spaces. So it goes by deep, close, and rear. And so it drives the turn sequence drives both players of red and blue through their respective frameworks and kind of pushes their plans together. And so it assumes from the start that you're going to use the full, hour by hour sequence, which through play testing we've seen basically does in real time, like plays through in real time, which is insufficient, right? But the revisions I've started and will continue to work on in the near term here is guiding players to decide and how to grab the elements of that model that are relevant for them so that they can have the rigor and the aspects of that turn sequence that they need from the model to get the level of analysis that they want for their plan, and then omit the rest of it and kind of use professional judgment to, it's close enough, we'll talk it out and we'll drive on. And so that way they can kind of choose the amount of time, the real time it takes, and then they can adjust the time horizons for a given turn. So say, I don't want to just do an hour by hour turn, I want to do a 6 hour turn. They now have a base unit of, I can take 6 actions for that given phase. And so that's kind of how I approach time. So it's kind of squishy when it comes down to it, but the operations that we're planning for and how we do our planning is very squishy.
Our 14th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by all of our Patreon supporters, but especially our regimental patrons who supported us at the top level. Regiment of Strategy Gaming would like to thank Stagger Wing, Paul LaFontaine, Matthew Rowe, Joseph Knorr, Fred and our favourite podcast dog, Kevin Bertram, Catastrophe Games, Patrick Garrity, Michael Sunborg, and Andy J. Wargaming is our jam, and they help us spread it. You too can join the Armchair Dragoons as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
As a part of the model that you're putting together and the different players you have around the table, obviously in a professional, a practitioner setting, you're going to have multiple players around the table as opposed to a hobby war game that's usually just 2. And if you have multiple players that beyond the 2, it's rare that they are on the same team. It's more likely some sort of asymmetric setup. However, in a professional game, particularly one that is analyzing military course of action, obviously you're going to want a lot of your different specialties represented around the table. So you don't just have a commander type, you're going to have the maneuver guy, the intel guy, the engineer guy, the aviation guy. I'm using generic terms for our hobby folks because if I start just numbering off staff sections, not everybody's going to know what we're talking about. But in addition to blue and red and the different players you have involved in blue and red, modern battlefields have a bunch of other folks out there. And so do you, in your game and in the formal write-up and process by which your game is played, how do you account for civilians, for allied partners, for unknowns, for all of those other things present on the battlefield that aren't just red and blue trying to put holes in each other?
That's a good question. And that is honestly an area that I haven't gotten to yet, because the scope of this whole problem set and like the volume, like the breadth of the disciplines within a brigade staff that needs to be modeled into this has been significant. And probably one of those areas that was I had a sense of initially, but it blew way past that pretty early on. The going from like the player perspective, it's the going in assumption is that there's going to be a minimum of 2 players. You're going to have a red and a blue. The idea being that one is the blue player is going to be your likely an operations officer or some delegate thereof, and then the red being played by the intelligence officer or some delegate thereof. And then any additional staff that can provide their professional expertise, they can actually get parted out certain models and they can actually do some of the housekeeping that's associated with that. Sustainment is a great example. So your logisticians who are counting the number of rounds that you're firing or the fuel that you're consuming, that's tedious in any game. This one is, I feel, is a little bit smoother, but it's still an extra step that it may be difficult for someone who's looking at the big picture to keep a track of. But name your flavor of specialty, those staff officers can help kind of come in, provide their professional judgment and expertise, and then kind of take some of that burden off of that main player for either blue or red to support that side. Yeah.
So talk for a minute about how it is that you did that so that the sustainment system is relatively simple, but still generates the data it needs.
It's a great question, sir. So this is one area that I do feel pretty proud of with this war game. So the sustainment system is based around pallet math that Army logisticians usually use. And so a pallet is, as it sounds, is a size of a pallet, and it holds a cubic volume over top of it. And it's a very simple and quick way to understand how much of a packaged item you can carry. And our things that are hauled on the back of a truck are usually put onto a steel rack that can hold 8 pallets. And that's usually how we transfer supplies. And so understanding that is the base unit of how logisticians kind of calculate their haul capacity and their capacity to store, I used that as kind of the Rosetta Stone for artillery, and understanding how many rounds does it take to achieve a certain effect, and then translating that into how many pallets does that occupy. And then it kind of obfuscate that math that the player doesn't want to have to do, therefore the staff officer, right? And you make it so that I want to do an action, I need to consume so many class 5, which is ammunition bullets, right, to shoot my artillery pieces. And then you can see the tangible result and kind of check off of a little pictorial representation of that haul capacity. So you can viscerally feel how many artillery rounds you are firing to achieve the effect that you want. And it's oftentimes more than you thought it was going to be. And I've done the same thing for fuel as well, and it's all scaled to the capacity of a given formation to be able to haul those supplies.
Yeah, if you have enough artillery ammunition still, you're not firing enough. That's the general rule of thumb, right?
That's right. And it usually takes more than you think it does to do what you want.
Yeah. One of the things that has often frustrated me about hobby war games, and James has heard me bitch about this off and on over the years, but it annoys the crap out of me when hobby designers and hobby players confuse granularity with realism, right? It's not more realistic just because you're tracking caliber by caliber every round that is fired in a hobby wargame context. However, that is something that is relevant for you at the professional level if part of your course of action comparison as a result of these war games is which one is more sustainable. You got to know, hey, we need more smoke rounds for the artillery because we got 2 breaches in this plan versus 1 in the other, or hey, we're going to go through a whole lot more small arms ammo than we thought, or whatever it may be. That in this case, it's not just realistic and granular, it is also appropriate in the case of the logisticians, so
yeah, absolutely. There was an iteration where I did delve into the potential of tracking the munitions by type. So you have your smoke rounds or your incendiary munitions or high explosives, so on and so forth, right? And the game system supports that. It doesn't break anything to be able to track it and use them that way. But I found that it was just an extra layer of complexity that slowed the game down. So it's something I'm going to include kind of in an advanced rules if someone cares to do it, but not in kind of the ready presentation of the kind of turn sequencing.
Yeah. Let me ask a question in terms of outputs, because again, big difference between what the military does and what the hobbyists do. The hobbyist, the output is, did you have a good time, right? Are you out of pretzels? Those are the kinds of outputs that hobbyists care about. In the particular case of an MDMP war game, this is course of action comparison where we're playing out a couple of different courses of action for how we could achieve the mission using the war game, and then comparing them against certain criteria that the boss has given us, either because we had a particular follow-on mission or because we're tying in with, left and right flanking units or whatever the reason might be. The commander has given us some directed guidance, and the course of action comparison isn't just did we win or lose, but also did we as a part of that, are we meeting the commander's intent for these different criteria, and how do they evaluate and stack up against each other? And so to that end, like, there's particular note taking and information gathering that has to happen as a part of this course of action war game that you've got. How have you structured or formalized or incorporated that record keeping, note taking, that comparison stage at the end of it all as a part of your game and your process there?
Yeah, it's been pretty tricky. So the obvious piece that we've already kind of touched on is the map itself, right? So we've got all the player actions being recorded onto a piece of clear acetate, right? So you could literally hold up the physical evidence of what just happened in the war game, every single movement, the engagements, and then with the course of action sketch, that the kind of overview, the drawing of what we expected to happen. There's additional casualty tracking on there. So between those two items of what you actually use to play the game, there is a written record of everything that just happened, right? And so you can use that to kind of answer some of those questions from the start. It's like what was our what we call combat power at the end of the operation, and that's those two products right there could give you that right very, very easily. The other aspects of it is the how do you capture the qualitative aspects, right? Doctrine provides like two different answers. It's like, oh, you can use a sketch note, which basically like take notes, or you can use a sync matrix, which a lot of like units use with the kind of loose methods we use right now. But it usually becomes this very hectic process of writing down every single thing that happens on an Excel spreadsheet on every single one of those turns. And it's a very kind of chaotic process for the person who's trying to get the recorder to write things down and the recorder to feverishly, hammer away at what just happened. So it's a very difficult process. So what I did is I made a variant of the sketch note that was structured so that it could very readily capture kind of, oh, this was kind of weird. This was what diverged from what we were expecting. And you're recording those items for a given turn. And so with that, it's got you have your map record and then your written record, right? And as you approach this, you picked out the models of the game that would meet the warfighting function or the military specialty that would answer those commanders' initial criteria, the evaluation criteria for the course of action that you're analyzing. And so all of those things together help you answer those and those questions and evaluate the course of action. And then you have tangible items that you can go and improve your course of action with afterwards.
In terms of the train up time needed for a player to learn how your game works, how Overmatch is structured, is played, a chance to really internalize it to the point where they're able to grasp it and run with it without a ton of reference back to rules or cheat sheets or player aids or anything like that. What's your rough train up time, learning time, and how do you envision this thing sort of getting rolled out, deployed, train the trainer, put it into use? Is this just a giant thought experiment, or are you trying to figure out how to actually get this into use, at least through the Center for Army Lessons Learned, if not actually, working towards formalizing it in doctrine somehow?
That's the kind of dream for this is if I can get it to a place where it is actually useful for brigade staffs to actually use, and then in training, and then ideally getting those the models validated so it could be potentially used for other more risky endeavors after that. That's the goal. You just want it to be useful, not just like you say, the thought experiment. So a lot of officers, or just staff officers in general, if you put something like this in front of them and it says, hey, this is, even if it was codified in doctrine, and here's this big tome of rules that you need to go and learn how to play this game, the chances are very few of them will read it, not because they don't care, but it's because they have so many other constraints on their time, right? And so I want to, again, reduce those burdens and those barriers to playing this game as much as possible. And so the turn sequence serves as a light version of the rules. It's got everything that you need to play the game in front of you. It serves to go through the turn sequence. It serves to have the combat results tables or movement tables or whatever it may be. And so you can follow this step by step through the war game itself. And then from the broader structure of how do I pick and choose what I want? Again, step by step. How did I get from planning into this war game and then back again?
One of the things we did to test that. So this is like 20, 22 pages of stuff. For every step, all the stuff is there on that 8.5 by 11 sheet in front of you. One of the guys on the committee is a tactics instructor, highly experienced tactician, not a wargamer by any means. And he walked in to test the version that had this, and we handed it to him for his side and said, we're not going to explain anything because we want to see if this works. And it did. It's just really great work by Alex.
That's pretty incredible. I'm working under the presumption that there is a certain amount of advanced knowledge needed of U.S. military and doctrine, but also of the planning doctrine and the MDMP, and there's not a lot of explanatory information in terms of here's what an MDMP is. Here's what a course of action. Like, you should already know those things going into this, right?
There are aspects of it, yes. So like the planning process, if someone decided, a war gamer decided I want to play Overmatch, but I don't have a plan to go with, and I'm just going to make up a scenario and then kind of jam it into the system and run with it, right? Some of these things it may not be necessary, right? Like, I'm going to prioritize all of the warfighting functions and I'm going to play through the whole thing beginning to end using the full system, right? The game will work and meet that need, but each of those steps is a distillation of the relevant planning factors that staff would reference in doctrine anyway, and then made into the game system, but it's still applicable for understanding the planning factors that are relevant in operations. So the movement rate is directly out of a table that says what is the movement rate for a given formation type, or how fast can you in place a certain type of obstacle. Those things are already present in doctrine and kind of bring all those things together. And so using the system as it stands, it will give you the best, closest approximation without a lot of even breadth of military professional expertise in any given field. And of course, if you say, oh, well, my weapon can range so much farther because I'm using this exquisite munition, that's cool. Use your professional judgment and use that range if that's what meets the need at the moment.
Yeah. So, James, have you started leaning on the rest of the schoolhouse to put this into play?
Not yet, not directly, but indirectly, sort of. So, explaining that. One of the things that we did a little earlier in March than we normally do, but we try to run in later March normally, is the MMAS showcase. There's a fancy room just off the fancy main entrance to the building. So people tend to walk in and out of the building past this. And we will reserve it for the afternoon. It's this glassed in room, so everyone can see that something's going on in there. And the students set up their war games, and anybody who comes by can see them and talk to them. The second piece of this is that we usually, specifically Mike Dunn, because he's good at it, is the carnival barker trying to get people to come in and visit. And the students, no surprise, will usually tell all of their faculty and their fellow students, hey, you should come by and see my project this afternoon. So people come by to see that. The sneaky part of this, from my perspective, is that it's late in the project, and this really is a solid mock defense, because anybody could come by and they need to be able to answer any question that some random person could have. And those people could be anything from their fellow classmates to the dean of the college to a multi-star general. All of these things have happened on some days. And with these guys, with their show off about 2 weeks ago, much of that happened. We didn't get any generals. We didn't get the dean of the college, but we got a number of colonels, including the one in charge of the school. And it was a good thing. They come by, they look at the project, they talk to the students, and generally they walk away impressed by the project because it's good stuff and the students are ready to explain them. So in that sense, the campaign has begun. Plus, two of the people on his committee are in the tactics faculty, which means that there's also this sort of, hey, there might be a way we could use this, starting to slide perhaps through the system. Will it happen? I don't know. There's a lot of crazy politics in what system gets used. So.
Oh, absolutely. No. And look, the pie in the sky piece of all this is, well, of course, I would love for this to become institutionalized, and it's the standard standard by which everyone operates. But the reality is that's unlikely to happen just because there's only one doctrinal standard. There's how many people making recommendations to it. So I think we can all sort of conceptually accept that that's the least likely outcome in all of this, because you've got to have the one magic bullet get through in order for that to happen. But still, it's always a fun thought experiment to have the conversation. So
Yep.
Shifting away from Overmatch and your project and the studies and such directly, as you've been exposed to the wide variety and array of different wargaming things that the good Dr. Sterrett and Mike Dunn, another friend of the program, have dropped in front of you, is there a particular hobby flavored game that you really thought, oh wow, this is kind of cool, I'm going to want to keep playing this even after I'm out of the program? A particular aspect of a game that you really dug and enjoyed, and maybe sort of even sort of pilfered for your game?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have bought a number of games since I started this program, to the chagrin of my wife. But I'm closely monitored when I go to Tabletop Game and Hobby in Overland Park. But I have enjoyed a game called Littoral Commander. I like the mechanics of it, the presentation. I borrowed a lot of the sustainment and unit tracking, at least early on. I was kind of using unit cards in a similar way that Littoral Commander does. I have moved away from that since then, but I really liked how that felt as a player, to be able to interact with the game. One of my all-time favorites is BattleTech. But it's unfortunately a lot of the mechanics and the housekeeping that's involved is really a passion project that I just don't think that the officers that are going to play my game, I've got the patience for.
See, it's interesting to me that you would extol the virtues of Littoral Commander, but be concerned with the housekeeping and record keeping involved in BattleTech, because they're not that far apart compared to a lot of other hobby games. The fact that Littoral Commander has all those unit cards laid out on the side tracking your various types of ammunition, above and beyond just moving the counters around on the map, there's more boxes you got to check on a mech record sheet in BattleTech, but it's still more record keeping and a little heavy, a little bit more of a heavy lift with the JCC cards, as well as all the ammo tracking and hit point tracking you got to do for the units in Littoral Commander compared to what you've got in most Hex Encounter war games.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's a fair point. The main difference that I see in that, though, is that the surface level of the mech record sheet, right, is that it's all right there in front of you, or is it? No, you have all of the other exquisite munitions and weapon types and chaining of all of the unique things that can happen. So the process is not as simple as it first seems, and that really accumulates over time. And as a person who's tried to convert several people into acolytes of the game, that has been the chief complaint. And it just eats up a lot of time. Whereas Littoral Commander is largely what you see is what you get with that. There's not a lot of second and third order kind of effects that have to chain together.
Yeah, not as much for sure, but still not zero as you find in most Hex Encounter war games.
Sure.
Have you ever, in your BattleTech explorations, did you ever play any of the old WizKid click-based versions of BattleTech?
I did. Yeah. I played Mage Knight, which was the other, like the fantasy version of it. Yeah. Really liked it. It was very simple in that, and it simplified a lot of things. But you don't necessarily get the fun feel of really just chipping away at somebody.
Yeah, it's funny how opinions on the WizKids BattleTech click-based game are so polarizing compared to most other BattleTech players. Conversely, is there a particular game or system that was put in front of you as a part of your exposure to lots of different games in your curriculum that you just bounced off of kind of hard and you just said, man, this one is not for me?
Bonus
points if it's one of James' favorite games too. So.
No.
I would say that there wasn't necessarily one game that stands out, but I've kind of found myself to be really judgmental when I look at maps because of the needs for my game. I wanted a higher level of realism with it. And so whenever I start to see a lot of kind of asymmetrical shapes and lines connected between them, it just doesn't do it for me. There's too much. It seems very arbitrary as to where things are placed. I got. All right, here we go. We'll get into some specifics then. So Friedrich was a great game, and I enjoyed playing it. And I am sure that there are reasons why the lines are connected the way that they are. But there are aspects of it that feel contrived. And then any other game that has, connected nodes, it's just the capricious whims of the game designer as to why those are connected the way that they are. And I like more of a free play game. And whenever I look for games for myself, and especially now having, looked for purpose for game mechanics.
Yeah, understandable. So that's I can see where, especially for a military person used to those 1/50K topographical maps with your 1,000-meter grid squares, that something like an area-based movement with non-repeating shapes, or like you said, a node network that almost looks like a strip map, that I could see where those could be a little frustrating and conceptually just feel a little wrong. Why do I have to stay on this road? Why can't I hang a left here in the middle of this point-to-point connection? So yeah, I could totally understand that. James, as you're looking at the pantheon of MMAS theses that you've seen come across the table, relative utility to the force as a whole, sounds like this one is fairly high compared to some of the others that we've seen come across the program. Death Can Wait is the exemplar everybody keeps going back to because it's a topic that is important and rarely wargame. But like the Carpathian Eagles game, probably a limited utility for that out there in the rest of the force. Probably not a lot of use for the Reconstruction war game.
Yes, but, right? And the but, let's take those two as examples, right? So Carpathian Eagles, not necessarily a lot of use for the U.S. Army. And for those who don't know, Carpathian Eagles was done by Major Popescu, a Romanian officer from their air mobile forces, on running an air mobile force to defend the Carpathians against the Red 4 coming from the northeast. Write your own scenario for who Red might happen to be.
Curious who's northeast of Romania.
I can't imagine. My geography has just flown out my mind. Anyway, for us, arguably directly not a lot of use. But on the one hand, it was a decent game on trying to run an air mobile force against a mechanized onslaught, one, and that has some utility. Two, for the Romanians, it has rather more utility because it was effectively a scenario that they've spent some time thinking about. And second, the Reconstruction is in fact another counterinsurgency game, and it's a counterinsurgency where the counterinsurgent lost. Yeah. So it comes out of our history, and it's a way of looking at, all right, how did we get it wrong there? How would we get it right next time? And one of the problems that the Army tends to have, in part for good reason, in part for bad reasons, is whatever the current challenge is everything, and whatever the yesterday's challenge is history and gets kicked into the dustbin. So for, in part, good reasons, right? That's the thing we need to do. While we were fighting the counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan, we kind of let a lot of the high-end conflict stuff slide because we're dealing with the thing we were actually in, which I get, right? That's not entirely wrong. But equally, now that we are no longer in those particular counterinsurgencies, a lot of the counterinsurgency stuff is being allowed to slide as we refocus on large-scale combat operations. Again, I get it. That's the pendulum is the nature of the beast. But a game like that can help people keep their minds in the problem without letting the whole thing slide, even when you're not spending a lot of time on it.
Oh, let's go! Guys, as we're starting to wrap this up, first of all, definitely appreciate the time you've been able to spend here and kind of explaining the games, explaining what we're looking at. The mandatory question I have to ask Alex is, has James leaned on you to come to Origins yet and come show off what you're doing to a whole bunch of hobbyists there?
Not yet.
All right. So James, why not?
Because I know what they're doing in June. All of
Yeah.
these guys are doing their change of station in June, so typically the time they've got available to come to Argents in June is 0.
That's part of their
Unfortunately.
leave. Like, is they're moving from one station to the next. Like that's just a stop on the trip to wherever your next duty station is.
Yes, but then they have to convince Household 6.
I got it, but it's not impossible. Columbus has a very nice zoo they could send everybody to for a day or two. So, all right. I kind of had to throw them in. Okay. So, big takeaway from all of this, Alex, as you're trying to sort of sum up what you've learned so far in the curriculum and kind of where you see it being of use beyond just the one specific game that you've designed, but looking beyond that in terms of the rest of your career, for however many more years you've got left in a tree suit, is there a particular key takeaway or lesson from the wargaming part of the curriculum that's going to really be a kind of a touchstone for you going forward as you move on in your career there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think so as a simulations officer, I am wedded to constructive simulation for training. And wargaming is kind of the redheaded stepchild that everyone forgets about a lot of times. And so I've gained a lot greater appreciation for why wargaming is still very relevant for our military today, and then the use cases for it, and then understanding where the boundaries of its limitations may be, and then being able to make those appropriate recommendations to use the right tool to meet the right end. Sometimes digital constructive simulation is the best way to go to meet the objectives, or sometimes we really need to have a more visceral understanding about the problem set and work through it, or it may be really squishy and difficult to model. And again, that's where the war games really come into it. So I think that's really the biggest takeaway is understanding the boundaries of both of those worlds, the analog and the digital simulation, and being able to use them both effectively.
Cool. James, is that what he's supposed to be taking away from the program?
That's a great thing to be taking away from the program. Obviously, one of the things we're trying to do is create better, more effective acolytes in the Church of Wargaming, spreading the word. The thing that I would add is that what often gets lost on both sides of wargaming is that the magic of it is that it's simulation wedded to competition, and it's having the thinking opponent on the other end that is what makes wargaming in many ways special. Whether that's it's the computer game where the designer may have programmed something in, the programming team programmed in the opponent, or it's a solo game where in effect your opponent is the designer and the mechanics they built, or it's Alex sitting across the table from me, however it might be. But that's where you find suddenly that your plan was crap, which is why it is part of the planning process for the military, because you want somebody to give you that acid test of your planning before you take it out and people start dying. See if there's something that you can identify that's either an opportunity or a threat now, so that you can take advantage of the opportunity, ward off the threat before it becomes real.
Makes sense. So cool. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Definitely appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to take a little bit of time and sort of dig into this formal curriculum that exists at Command General Staff College. And James, I know you've been here a couple of times, but it's always cool to see what the students are bringing to the table.
Absolutely.
Just because, as we do this occasionally throughout the years, they've always got something new and neat and nifty and cool that they've managed to come up with. And so it's fun to see that there's still innovation out there in the military side of things. And that they are learning from the hobby side of things. So I love that cross-pollination. So that's great. Audience, we appreciate you sticking with us as we start to wind up season 14 here. We've still got a conversation around Wargame Awards. We've still got a conversation around Adepticon coming up. So we've got a couple of episodes left before we wrap up this season. And we appreciate you sticking with us until we hit our summer hiatus and we start dealing with conventions and travel and families and all that other stuff that happens during the summers. So we appreciate you joining us this evening, and we'll catch you next time on another episode of Mention and Dispatches.